to do this, I've rather simplified some of the theory, because the paper I've got here is rather too long for 15 minutes. And it is possible, if you've got questions about the theory, I might manage to answer them, not from my own knowledge, but because I've got more text. This paper looks at the territory of Romania during Late Antiquity and the early medieval period. Now, this is a region which hosted significant migrations as tribes from the Eastern Steppe moved west and discovered the remnants of Roman civilization. Scholars have largely studied this period from a cultural historical perspective, contrasting the presence of the migrating barbarians with the need to identify the continuous presence of a Romanized population. This migratory space is a key aspect of the Romanian national narrative, which focuses on the many depopulations and repopulations of the territory, employing these grey areas of the past to propagate a particularly modern Romanian identity based on the Romans and native Dacians. Emily began this paper by explaining migratory space. Using theories derived from anthropology and geography, she outlines the role of the Romans and the native Dacians in the Romanian national narrative. And she's going to follow that by an analysis of how the late antique and early medieval migrations have featured within Romanian archaeology. Finally, Emily will suggest an alternative archaeological approach to migrating groups, approaches which focus on connections and contacts between peoples rather than attempting to fix them to particular places and times. And just looking at the theory that Emily is working with, there are two slides here which give a summary, if you know the work of these authors, of the sort of perspectives that she's developing. Now, I'm not going to run through these in any detail at all. She's working with what she calls space theory, which she derives from Lefebvre and Massey. They work on space as socially constructed and space as social interaction. Space is a migration, and she's drawing up here on Hamid Barber's third space, which is something I know something about, and scape, which is derived from aperture, and social space filled with meaning. And she's also working with landscape, and how landscape is always in the process of becoming, I suppose, something, some of the papers we've already been through have explored to a degree at least. Now, also, she wanted to explore spaces of migration. So taking that sort of space theory that I've just outlined very briefly and thinking of some other theories, the theory of transnational spaces, which derives from this book, Nation Unbound, continuities of migrant experiences, so working on how migrants continue or migration can continue, variations over time and space, thinking about the sort of context of particular migrations and societies and how they differ in terms of migration, and diaspora space, which comes out of some of the previous theories on the last slide. And also working with this concept of borderscapes, which I've been playing around with a bit myself. The idea, and indeed Andy Gardner, and others of you may too, borderscapes are zones of encounter, not fixed within national boundaries. So having gone through that theory rather swiftly, Emily talks about migratory space as relational social space, contingent upon encounters which are unconstrained by past or present political borders. She mentions that similar approaches exist when the studies of nationalism and migration, or studies understanding territory as an active political strategy. And her goal is to unite all these approaches with approaches to archaeological landscape, drawing connections between the migratory space, which is informed by the archaeological record, and the national narrative of a country like Romania, which places great emphasis on the depopulation and repopulation of territory. Romanian nationalism is fundamentally tied to ideas about the interaction of the Romans and the local population, the Dacians. The original narrative about Romania's national past dates to the 17th century and features the Romans conquering the territory of Dacia and removing the Dacians entirely. This then gave the Romanians an unbroken line of descent, beginning with the civilizing Romans. This was a powerful narrative, especially in the 19th century, and it was a major part of the strategy used by the principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia to gain independence from the Ottoman Empire and unite to form the modern nation of Romania in 1862. Emily then wanted to take a closer look at the story, inspired in part by the monumental depiction of the Dacian Wars on Trajan's column. After Trajan defeated Decebalus, the leader of the Dacians, for the second and final time in 106 CE, Rome finally took control of the Dacian territory in the heart of the Carpathian Mountains of Transylvania. This territory became the Roman province of Dacia, which the Romans only managed to hold until 275 CE. The key question, Emily asks, is what happened to the Dacian population after Trajan's victory? According to Eutropius, Trajan exterminated the Dacians. Dan Roscu analysed the literary tradition supporting Dacian extermination and concluded that there are 3 references in 2 different sources for this mass obliteration, along with a strange lack of epigraphic evidence for Dacian names. But there are other less drastic ways in which Dacia could have lost a significant proportion of its population. And it may be that we are talking about a combination of deportation and losses in war, as well as the recruitment of Dacian men into the Roman military. This lack of population in Dacia was a crucial piece of the Romanian national narrative, especially in the 18th and 19th centuries, because it gave Trajan an empty territory to colonize with civilized Romans. And she talks about some examples of 18th century writers who travelled to Rome and linked the origins of Romanian history to the foundation of Rome itself, including that the line of descent was continuous since Trajan must have exterminated the Dacians. So she's talking about works that argue this sort of linear development of history with the population surviving in the post-Roman ages. Population movements in modern Romanian territory was once again important when the Roman province of Dacia fell in 275 CE. What happened to the Romanized populations? According to this national narrative, the Romanized inhabitants of Dacia remained in the territory, hidden in either the mountains or the forests, while the waves of migrating peoples swept through the region in the 4th to 12th centuries. There was no possible third space or the creation of something new, since the ancestors of the Romanians hid from the barbarians with their Roman cultural identity intact. The implication is that they presented an empty land to the migratory tribes arriving from the Russian steppes, and simply got lucky in that most of these new people did not choose to stay for long. This interpretation of the relationship between the Romanized populations and the migratory people has had a long-term impact on the research of late antique and early medieval Romania. Romanian literature refers to the period between the 4th and 12th centuries as the years of moral decline, of darkness and struggle, and again she's given some examples here. The term Age of Migrations is used by scholars to describe this period, and cultural historical archaeology has been the primary method of study, with scholars aiming to link sets of material assemblages with ethnic groups known from historical sources. Unlike the earlier Roman migrations, in the Romanian national narrative, the Goths, Alans, Huns, and a range of other groups are the enemies of civilization and of progress. In the 1980s, the communist dictator Nicolae Ceausescu would claim that the Great Migrations were responsible for Romania's inferior position to the West. Now, thinking about approaches to migratory groups, how do the migratory tribes feature within Romanian archaeology? Curta has written, archaeologists manipulated such concepts as migration, diffusion, and culture to reach very different, often conflicting conclusions. Conflicting is a good word to describe the state of research on this period in Romania. It is a mess of conflicting archaeological cultures, and ethnic identities and interpretations are often based on sites which have not been systematically excavated. cultural historical archaeology has an impressive legacy within this discourse, with the construction of a shifting map of ethnic groups and their influences on Eastern European territory, all the while maintaining a distinction between natives and migrants. It should be said that it is true not just of Romania, but of Eastern Europe and the Balkans in general. Scholars like Florian Curta have written extensively on this. The first main trend of the age of migration scholarship is a tendency to try and reconstruct migratory peoples like the Avars or Slavs as bounded entities of a particular time and place with archaeologically definable and stable characteristics.
3 minutes. 3 minutes.
Ah. Okay. Good. The second trend is the dichotomy between the migrant and the native, or the native, and how it drives the research agenda. Not all scholarship from the past decade goes as far as Spinier, who echoes much earlier arguments for the continuity of the Romanized population in the Carpathian Danubian area during the troubled period of the migrations. And she talks about a range of Romanian scholars here who reflect on these issues. And hopefully her table here should help to give you some background to the issues she's discussing here. And I haven't got time to go through this. So our understanding of the age of migrations is limited by the need to understand the encounters of different peoples within a linear framework of specific times and places and clearly defined material culture groups. And Emily asks, what if we instead focus on how particular peoples choose to engage with the cultural and geographical spaces they were moving through? Returning to Emily's definition of space as socially constructed and always in the process of becoming, landscape might be thought more of in terms of its limiting influence on bounded identities like migration or the native. Now I'm having to cut a bit of discussion out here. I'm going to go to the conclusion. To conclude, given the differing research agendas towards the age of migrations, Hungarians, Romanians, Bulgarians, it is at times difficult to understand the archaeological evidence. The modern territory of Romania hosted some of the most sustained long-term migrations seen in antiquity and the medieval period. But because of the Romanian national narrative's fixation on Rome and the Dacians, we have a very limited understanding of these peoples outside of cultural historical archaeology. The implicit argument in the scholarship of the age of migrations has been that space cannot be altered by migration. The national territories will remain unaffected. Archaeology has also been predisposed towards sedentary populations or bounded entities of a particular time and place, which can compound the problem. And obviously Romania is not the only area in which that's true. And things, I'm sure, have been moving on in terms of interpretations in the recent past. So if instead of this sort of bounded concept, we view regions like modern Romania as relational social space, contingent upon encounters which are unconstrained by past or present political borders, we might be able to see more clearly the incredible array of multicultural encounters taking place throughout this landscape. Hopefully future research or current research will continue to grow and diversify in appreciation of the encounters outside the boundaries of migrant and native. And this is especially important given the negative attitudes towards migration in our world today.